Uh, adoption of technology, sir. Sir, actually, what we have seen is that if the technology is relevant, it is intuitive to use, okay, and it's functional and useful, it gets adopted, right? Take a look at WhatsApp penetration, take a look at Facebook penetration, take a look at Twitter. How many of us here have heard of a game called PUBG? Something called PUBG. Very few, right? We are out of touch. I hadn't heard of it 2 weeks ago. You know, it's been banned in Gujarat because it's being used too much. Okay? So PUBG is the latest phenomenon, but the youngsters in India are just playing. Sorry? Have you heard of it?
No, I haven't.
Yeah. So I heard of it 2 weeks ago, and my entire team, which are in the mid-20s, telling me, you don't know PUBG? Right? Okay? So we are out of touch. Technology is being adopted. It's just that younger people tend to adopt it faster. Right? And I don't know what the average age in this room will be, but maybe it's in the 40s, okay, average, right? Maybe a little higher, I don't know. But, you know, young people are adopting technology very fast, sir, right? And India is mostly young. Yeah. And I'll address one more question. The infant industry argument. So there are two things here. One is you're saying infant industry argument will protect domestic industry from foreign players. The other is argument which is protect the smaller people in India from larger players, whether Indian or overseas, right? And the two, you know, you need to look at both. So the small shopkeeper is not just worried about Amazon. He was equally worried about Flipkart until when Flipkart was still domestic, right? So you got to be clear. Are you going to protect the small shopkeeper from only foreign players or also larger domestic players and more organized domestic players? Because if you are not going to protect domestic players, then the outcome will be same for him. Okay? And I'll say one more thing. We have, in our company, in Naukri, competed against the best in the world, right? And if we did not face that competition, okay, we perhaps would not have innovated so much and been where we are. It's up to us to compete and win. We want a level playing field. We're okay with it as our company.
Yeah. Rajan?
So the issue of monetization of data, I think from the operator perspective, there's a plethora of stuff that's out there that really puts the focus in terms of what is our liability on this. That is a principal concern for operators. And I think although we have a tremendous amount of data, please be assured we do not do deep packet inspection. All right, just to set your minds at ease, there is a tremendous amount of other data that's available, obviously, to the operators that can be legitimately utilized. But I think what is going to be key is what happens in terms of the Act, the Data Protection Act. Because what is privacy? What are you in control of? What are we in control of? What do we need to do? Who can we share it with? Are all matters that need to be discussed, locked down, and defined before we can begin to start acting. Because one of the very troubling things, if you look at the Act, is this whole thing about the right to be forgotten. God forbid we start going down a path and then all of a sudden there's this mass request for obliteration of information and data all the way through the endpoints. Those would be very difficult to fix after the fact. So I think operators will wait a bit to see what emerges in the National Data Protection Act.
Thank you. I think we are running over time, so I'm going to call this session to a close. I remember your question, so I thought I'll sort of address it in my closing statement. So I really don't want to say much. I think it's been a very rich discussion and a lot of good things have come out of this, and we'll keep this in mind for the research that we do. I did want to make 2 points very quickly, and then the point that you raised about impact of digital on media. Let me actually start with that. I mean, I think for us it's early days to be able to definitively say what the impact of digital on media is. But, I mean, there have been instances in the United States of close down of hard copy publications going only digital. There have been evidence of close down, going digital, and coming back to print, so hard copies as well. So, and given that India is such a heterogeneous market, both in terms of languages, geography, I don't know whether where anybody has done any, maybe there's some research which I'm not aware of, but there is certainly an impact. What the quantitative nature of that impact is, I'm not sure. We haven't done studies in ICRIER on that, but there is definitely an impact, and I suspect the impact will vary by connectivity, by language, and by geography. I did want to raise 2 points. One is on leadership that India has not played, but is likely to play. And if I were to make the point that India wishes to play that leadership role in global discussions on global platforms, and as India assumes the presidency of G20 in 2022, hopefully we will be able to beginning to set the agenda. And I know that there are sort of discussions within the government, some of which we are privy to in ICRIER, where there is indications from the government they want to be, as Anirudh said, no longer sort of agenda takers, but agenda setters. And the point I wish to make here in this context is that if there is a place that we can actually play that role effectively, I think it's the digital space. And as Ambassador Mukerji said, and many of you have said, that we can assume, but we'll have to come out of with our heads in the sand and have a more sort of global outlook. That's the first point I wanted to make. And the second point that I wish to make is on sort of the impact that data, etc., is going to have on the economy, and what role institutions like ICRIER could play in that. Recall what Rajan said in his comments is that we had huge voice revolution, and I recall that India was adding 18 to 20 million phones a month in 2008-9, and if you look at the data today, we are adding the same number of internet connections a month that we were adding voice connections. Of course, internet is, in the sense, as he said, mobiles have been integrated with IP networks. So those number of internet connections are being created within India. So the opportunity to actually sort of to leverage and harness this potential, I don't think we understand that very well or recognize that very well. And the point I'm making is that if we appreciate that, then our policy stance will change from being one of very gradualist embracing of reform and intervention to one of, hey, if we miss this bus this time, what is it we're going to lose? And I think there are two very different ways of looking at it, and I hope that we look at it in the form of trying to minimize the opportunity loss that will happen if we miss the bus this time. Related to the first point, that we are well placed to embrace the digital economy and play a global role, but we must sort of replicate those actions on the global stage in whatever sequence, whether home first or leadership later, or leadership in the global level first, and then use that to embrace domestic reform, whatever we do. But I think we should do it both at home, leverage it, and also exploit the global role that we can play. I'm sure there'll be lots more, and there's lots more that has been said, but this has been a very enriching discussion, and I'd like to thank Ambassador Mukerji, Sanjeev, and Rajan, and Anki in absentia, because she inspired a lot of the discussion, I think, for being wonderful panelists. Could you please join me in giving them a big round of applause?
Thank you very much for that wonderful discussion. That's now, I don't want to stay between lunch and all of you. We'll break for lunch, but we have, given that we have paucity of time, we are breaking for lunch for 30 minutes. We'll be back at 1:30. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, panelists, and thank you, moderator.
Sukhiya, hare Sukhiya ka samosa. Thank you.